Hey guys. Tonight we're slipping back into a time when the idea of central heating meant standing somewhere between the fire and the hole in the roof and hoping for the best. You're stepping into a medieval hut right now. Duck your head, the beams are low and you can already taste the smoke before you even see the fire. It burns your throat a little, stings your eyes and paints your hair with the same perfume that everyone in the village wears, eau de suit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice inside this cottage isn't the furniture, it's the haze. Smoke curls like restless spirits above the hearth, trapped beneath a roof of straw and timber. You wonder if anyone can actually breathe in here, but the old woman sitting by the fire just smiles, eyes half shut, hands red from the heat. She's lived in this for decades. To her, this smoky blur is comfort itself, the sign that the night is alive and the cold hasn't won. There's a hole somewhere up there in the thatch, meant to let the smoke out, but the wind keeps pushing it back in. The medieval equivalent of arguing with your chimney on a cold night. You shuffle closer to the hearth. It's not even a fireplace, really, just a shallow pit lined with stones. Flames dance lazily over half-burned logs that were probably damp this morning. They pop and hiss, the sound oddly soothing, like a grumpy cat complaining about dinner. You can see how villagers learn to live with imperfection. When your home fills with smoke daily, you simply accept that coughing is part of the lullaby. And here's a historical fact that'll make you blink through the haze. Most peasants in early medieval Europe didn't have chimneys at all, until around the 12th or 13th century. Before that, they relied on simple smoke holes or none at all. And archaeologists still find those soot-blackened rafters across England, France, and the Low Countries. You can imagine how it felt. Each night, the air thickening until it blurred the edges of everything, until you could almost pretend the world outside didn't exist. One quirky tidbit: some people believed that smoke kept evil spirits away, especially at night. They thought demons hated coughing, though maybe it was just that demons had better respiratory systems. Either way, villagers let the smoke linger intentionally, calling it holy breath. You can picture the irony. They were choking for safety. Scholars still debate whether this smoky lifestyle shortened lifespans dramatically, or whether the villagers simply became weirdly immune. One camp argues that chronic exposure to wood smoke caused early deaths from respiratory disease. Another suggests that the smoke actually sterilized surfaces and kept pests away, protecting food and thatched roofs from insects. You can pick your side, either smoke as killer or smoke as unsung hero. Tonight, you're just trying not to cry from the sting in your eyes. You glance around the one-room hut, a low bed of straw in the corner, a bench, a pot hung over the fire by a crooked iron hook. The air tastes of oak and sheep fat. A chicken scuttles by, probably sharing this space with the family for warmth. The walls are rough, the floor dirt, and the ceiling patched where sparks once caught. There's no chimney, no flue, no neat stonework like in the manor houses across the valley, just the ancient equation of survival. Fire equals life, smoke equals warmth. And warmth, however imperfect, is everything. You breathe out slowly, the sound lost under the crackle of wood. Your lungs ache a little, but your fingers feel better already, tingling from returning blood. The woman by the fire pokes the coals with a stick. The stick breaks and she tosses it back in without a word. You realize she's mastered a rhythm of living that modern people forgot, tending heat as though it were a child, coaxing, feeding, never letting it die. Out here, night lasts forever, and without the fire you wouldn't make it till dawn. It's funny, isn't it? We complain about central heating bills, but these people had to wrestle with smoke demons nightly. You shift, coughing, your eyes watering again. She chuckles softly, The kind of laugh that says, "You'll get used to it. Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. But one thing is certain. If you were a medieval villager, this smoky, suffocating, miraculous fire pit was your best friend." And as the hut fills with that thick scent of wood and wool and human persistence, you understand why people still call home the place that smells like warmth, even when it burns your eyes to breathe it. You quote, "We're still here, knees aching against the dirt floor, watching that open fire pit like it's both your savior and your slow-motion executioner, and you begin to understand why the medieval hearth was never just a place for cooking. It was the heart, lungs, and occasional arsonist of the entire house. The heat doesn't spread evenly. It flares, sulks, and spits like it has mood swings. You lean in too close and a burst of sparks makes you flinch back, brushing soot from your sleeve, and you hear the old man mutter something about fire having a temper. That's not just a phrase. In the chronicles of rural Europe, people spoke of fire as alive, capricious, sometimes blessed, sometimes cursed. One mainstream historical fact tucked inside this haze is that open hearth houses, especially those without chimneys, were the norm for nearly half of medieval Europe until the 13th century, and many peasants kept that setup well into the 1500s. Why? Because stone chimneys cost more than half a year's harvest. So people learned to dance with danger instead. The flames rise higher, licking the low beams, and you realize how terrifyingly close home was to bonfire. Roof timbers creak, and you imagine the thatch above catching fire faster than gossip in a tavern. You shift again, pulling your cloak around you, but the warmth still feels uneven, as if it's teasing you, warming one hand and freezing the other. There's a reason medieval people had such a deep relationship with superstition. When your only heat source could kill you in your sleep, you started saying prayers to the fire before bedtime. One quirky fact: in some alpine villages, families fed the fire with a few drops of ale or milk at night, whispering thanks to St. Bridget or the household spirit, hoping the flames would behave till morning. They called it the night offering. And imagine spilling your best drink just to stop your house from combusting. That's dedication. You tilt your head toward the thatch and see tiny holes where smoke has gnawed through, forming little constellations of daylight. That apparently counts as ventilation. Every exhalation adds another layer to the air, so thick it's almost tangible. You could slice it with a knife and serve it as smoked atmosphere. The children crawl closer, rubbing their hands, faces lit orange by the coals. Their hair smells of bacon, though no one's cooking any. This is what living with the hearth's fury meant, balancing comfort and chaos, warmth and wheeze. You notice how the walls, slick with soot, actually reflect some of the heat back inward, a crude but effective insulation trick. Some scholars argue that this thick coating of carbon acted as an early form of preservation, sealing wood from insects and moisture. Others roll their eyes and call it accidental chemistry. The debate continues in quiet academic journals, centuries removed from the coughing reality. You smile to yourself, imagining a medieval scholar defending his thesis in a smoke-filled hut while his parchment catches a spark. The irony writes itself. You lean closer again, and now the fire looks mesmerizing. Bright center, dim edges, alive like a breathing creature. The logs collapse inward, sending a burst of embers swirling into the air like tiny golden bees. The grandmother beside you doesn't even blink. She's long past fear. She knows exactly how to angle her body to feel warmth without letting her clothes ignite. That's an education you can't buy. Out here, every villager is part firefighter, part chemist, part philosopher. You think about how many times they rebuilt after accidental burns, yet never gave up on this method. What choice did they have? This was pre-modern Europe, where nights could stretch 12 hours long and cold could kill quicker than hunger. If the fire went out, so did your odds. There's a quiet reverence in how they treat the hearth, not as decoration, but as destiny. The family's dog curls closer, nose twitching, while the old man tosses another log in with the precision of a ritual. It must breathe, he mutters, poking holes in the ash to let oxygen through. You realize he's right. The fire suffocates easily if the smoke hole clogs, and everyone here knows how to read the signs. A roaring sound means joy, a hiss means warning. A cough from the rafters means pray it's not the roof. And still they endure it, night after night, generation after generation, perfecting the art of almost burning down the house but not quite. You can't help smiling as the warmth finally seeps through your boots. The fire crackles, the smoke dances, and your body relaxes despite itself. Maybe that's the medieval trick, accepting imperfection until it becomes peace. As you close your eyes, half dreaming, the smell of smoke starts to feel almost nostalgic. You realize that this too is home. The imperfect, coughing, glowing kind that keeps the darkness just far enough away for you to sleep. You wake to the sound of wind moaning through a hole in the roof, and for a moment you think you're inside a flute being played by nature itself, except this flute occasionally leaks rainwater and bird droppings. Welcome to the medieval ventilation system, otherwise known as that one gap up there that kind of works when the wind feels generous. You blink through the lingering smoke of last night's fire, and you can see shafts of light streaming down through the thatch, beams of sunshine slicing through the murk like divine spotlights, revealing just how much soot hangs in the air. You stand, stretch, and accidentally bump your head on a beam, proving yet again that medieval architecture was designed for people either shorter or more tolerant of concussions. You peer upward at the makeshift hole, about the width of a soup bowl, and realize this was the medieval version of climate engineering. One mainstream historical fact jumps out of this haze. Many early European cottages had what was called a louvre, not the fancy museum, but a crude wooden vent built into the roof ridge to let smoke escape. It was ingenious in concept and hopeless in execution. Rain poured in whenever it stormed. Snow fell directly onto the stew pot, and birds often nested there, mistaking the rising warmth for a welcome sign. You can picture it now, someone trying to enjoy breakfast while a pigeon stares down at them from the ceiling, unimpressed. Still, this system marked progress. People began experimenting with controlling air instead of surrendering to it. The roof became both a shield and a sieve. The thatch dried reeds, straw, or heather, acted like a natural filter, trapping larger smoke particles so the room didn't fill instantly. Over time, the underside of that thatch turned black and tarry, and some villagers insisted it made the roof stronger. There's a weird logic to that. Carbon coating can indeed make surfaces more resistant to rot, though it also made them one spark away from spontaneous combustion. The quirky tidbit: archaeologists found fossilized mouse nests in those smoky thatches, so saturated with soot that the tiny bones inside were preserved like relics, proof that even rodents got free sauna treatments. Standing there beneath this odd architectural masterpiece, you can hear the creaks and sighs of a house always halfway between suffocating and freezing. A drop of water lands squarely on your nose. You look up again. Great. The smoke hole has decided to double as a skylight. Medieval villagers didn't bother fixing such leaks unless they became rivers. They believed a little moisture helped tamp down sparks, a primitive fire safety system courtesy of the weather. Scholars still debate whether this faith in breathing roofs came from observation or sheer resignation. Some argue it was a deliberate design born from centuries of trial and error. Others suggest it was more accident than insight, just people patching holes as needed and calling it innovation. Whatever the truth, it worked barely. You sit back by the hearth, as dawn light turns the smoke into ribbons of gold. The air's thick but strangely peaceful, like the world is still wrapped in sleep. A hen flaps up to the rafters, settles on a beam, and adds her own contribution to the day's decor. You laugh softly. This place is a living laboratory of chaos, where every draft, every droplet, Every spark tells a story about human stubbornness. You imagine some poor villager centuries ago, squinting at his roof and thinking, if the smoke finds a way out, that's good enough. And somehow it was. The warmth clings to you like a sleepy animal, half comfort, half burden. Outside, frost glitters on the ground. Inside, the air hums with survival. And you realize the medieval roof wasn't just shelter, it was negotiation, a fragile truce between fire and sky dot. You wake coughing, eyes watering, realizing that every villager in this place is essentially a walking chimney with legs. The smoke that doesn't escape through the roof, most of it honestly escapes through you. Your lungs are the exhaust system. The air tastes like roasted bark and misery, and yet somehow everyone is alive. You glance at the farmer sitting cross-legged by the hearth, calmly whittling a spoon, breathing through the haze as if it's mountain air. His children run circles around the smoke column, laughing. They don't even flinch anymore. Their tiny bodies have adapted to a world where oxygen is a luxury item, and that's not exaggeration. According to studies of preserved medieval skeletons, chronic respiratory inflammation was common in peasant communities. Proof that smoke inhalation wasn't a rare hazard, it was daily breakfast. The funny thing is, they believed it was good for them, a mainstream historical fact. In many northern villages, people thought that the constant smoke hardened the lungs and smoked out illness. They'd say, better black inside than cold outside. You exhale and cough again. Apparently, you're not yet enlightened. A quirky tidbit worth coughing over. Some medieval healers prescribed smoke cures for coughs, blowing hot ash fumes under a blanket to expel bad humors. Essentially, they treated smoke with more smoke. The same logic as fighting fire with fire, except it just led to more sneezing. Scholars still debate whether this acceptance of suffocation was adaptation or desperation. Did people truly think it helped? Or was it easier to believe that than admit they were slowly marinating themselves like sausages? Either way, the result was the same: soot lungs and smoky souls. The room is dim but alive. The fire hisses, the roof crackles, the chickens gossip. Every villager moves through this air like fish through murky water. They wipe black streaks from their cheeks without even noticing. The grandmother hums softly while stirring a pot, and you realize her lullaby has a rhythm matched to her breathing. Inhale through the nose, shallow, exhale through parted lips, her own smoke survival technique. You try it. It helps a bit. You can almost see why they didn't leave the smoke behind, even after chimneys became known. It gave life a smell, a mood, a memory. The soot trapped in beams held stories of births, winters, storms. Each flake of carbon on the wall is like a fossilized breath of someone long gone. The idea sends a chill through you, but also a kind of peace. Outside, the air might be fresher, but it's also emptier. Here, you're breathing the same air as everyone who ever warmed themselves in this place. A strange kind of immortality. Your chest still burns, but your heart feels oddly warm. The fire pops, the farmer nods, and you understand why these people kept building homes that smoked them half to death. When comfort is scarce, even poison can feel like love. You wander outside for a breath of something resembling fresh air, only to find that even the fog smells faintly of fire. The entire village is exhaling smoke, roofs sighing, doors leaking little gray ribbons. The whole settlement looking like a collection of chimneys pretending to be houses. When you step back inside one cottage, your fingers trail over its wall and come away black. The stone is coated in a thick layer of soot so smooth it feels deliberate, like some kind of strange paint. This, you realize, is what centuries of survival look like. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind as you study that gleaming surface. Medieval cottages were often built of wattle and daub or rough stone, and without proper flues, the constant smoke gradually coated everything in a protective film. In some surviving structures, Archaeologists still find these carbon layers several centimeters thick, a record of generations breathing and burning in the same air. The villagers didn't just live in smoke. They became part of it. Their walls, their ceilings, their very skin wore the memory of every winter. You rub the soot between your fingers. It's soft, oily, strangely comforting. The old woman beside you grins, showing teeth as blackened as the wall. Keeps the damp out, she says, with the certainty of a scientist and the pride of someone whose home hasn't collapsed yet. Maybe she's right. Some modern chemists think the carbon film really did repel moisture, slowing rot in the beams. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some families even decorated the blackened walls by scraping patterns into the soot with knives, leaving behind shining trails of lighter stone, accidental murals made of necessity and boredom. You can imagine kids doodling spirals or saints during long winters, their artwork glowing faintly whenever the fire flickered. Scholars, of course, still argue about the meaning of those marks. Were they art or magic? Some think they were charms against evil spirits. Others see them as the first interior design experiments. You lean back, admiring the texture, glossy, uneven, alive, and realize this grime was more than dirt. It was history lacquered onto every surface. The air hums softly, and the smoke dances lazily in the golden light filtering through the roof vent. You could almost believe the soot had a soul of its own, clinging to these walls out of loyalty. You run your hand along the cold stone again and feel a pulse of warmth from within the stored heat from last night's fire. It's faint but steady, a secret reservoir keeping this space habitable. You chuckle softly. The soot, the smoke, the stones, all accidental collaborators in a survival strategy that worked just well enough. You exhale, watching your breath mingle with the haze. Maybe that's why they never scrubbed these walls clean. The blackness wasn't a flaw. It was proof of endurance, of life lived stubbornly against the cold. The cottage creaks, the fire whispers, and you feel the centuries breathing with you, one long smoky sigh stretching through time. You step outside and notice that half the warmth in this village doesn't come from fire at all. It comes from things that moo, grunt, and occasionally chew your sleeve. The barn door creaks open and a gust of thick animal breath rolls over you like a hairy blanket of humidity and hay dust. You shiver once, then stop. It's actually warm in here. Welcome to Medieval Climate Control, brought to you by the local cow cooperative. The villagers weren't fools. They knew exactly how much heat a body could give off, and they built their houses to steal it. A mainstream historical fact backs this up. Across northern Europe, especially in Scandinavia and the Alps, families shared their living quarters with animals during the harshest winters. The practice was called by redwelling humans in one half, livestock in the other, separated, if at all, by a low wooden wall. Each cow produces roughly 800 watts of heat just by existing, which means 4 cows were basically a medieval radiator system that mooed occasionally for maintenance. The quirky part, people sometimes bragged about how many cows they slept with, and for once it wasn't scandalous. There's an old Icelandic proverb that translates roughly to, "A cow in winter is half a stove." You lean against a stall post, feeling that shared breath of warmth, and you start to get it. Steam curls from the backs of oxen, chickens fluff themselves into feathered spheres, and a sleepy pig snorts like a kettle. The farmer beside you grins proudly. "No wind in here," he says, "only perfume." That's one word for it. You breathe shallowly, eyes watering from the mix of ammonia and damp straw, but it's undeniably cozy. Some scholars still debate how much this animal heat actually helped, arguing that the air pollution and disease risk might have outweighed the thermal gain. But others point out that survival leaves little room for cleanliness rankings. Warmth was life, even if it came with fleas. You crouch down beside a calf, its soft breath puffing against your hand. Its skin radiates the kind of gentle heat you can't get from any hearth, steady and unjudging. Somewhere behind you, someone laughs as a goat tries to chew the hem of your cloak, proving that rustic comfort always comes with minor inconvenience. You imagine a family at night, sleeping inches from their livestock, the rhythmic breathing of humans and beasts blending into one communal lullaby. Maybe that's why medieval people told so many animal-centered stories. They literally lived inside them. The walls creak, the straw shifts, and you feel the pulse of warmth ripple through the floor like a heartbeat. The logic makes perfect sense now. If fire could burn down your home, and the wind could freeze your lungs, then the only reliable furnace was a living one. You step closer to the door, take one last lungful of barn air, and smile through the haze. Warmth is warmth, no matter how it smells. You shuffle back into the cottage, stamping your boots, and notice that the floor doesn't crunch like frozen dirt anymore. It sighs under you, pliant and faintly warm, as if the earth itself were trying to help. Someone once told you that medieval peasants believed their packed earth floors held heat, that if you swept often and sealed them with ash or clay, the warmth from the hearth would somehow soak down and sleep there, waiting for the next night. You kneel, press your palm to the surface, and instantly feel what they must have felt, a coolness pretending to be comfort. Still, myths are stubborn. People want to believe the ground loves them back. The smell of soil mingles with smoke, wool, and a faint tang of livestock musk drifting through the wall. This room has no tiles, no rugs, just centuries of footprints pounded into a hard brown crust. You remember a mainstream historical fact. In much of Europe before the 15th century, only churches and the wealthiest manors could afford stone or plank flooring. For everyone else it was beaten earth, sometimes sprinkled with rushes or straw for cleanliness and insulation. The rushes didn't last long. They turned brittle, soaked up spills, hid crumbs, and attracted fleas until the floor became its own living ecosystem. Yet people swore it was warmer than bare ground, especially when mixed with ash. It wasn't science so much as superstition, a tactile hope that what came from the earth might protect them from it. You dig a finger into the corner near the wall, and the dirt gives way, revealing a darker, damper layer beneath. The old woman notices and chuckles. "That's the old floor," she says, "from before the fire." You blink. Apparently the last house burned down, and they just shoveled the ashes flat, called it a blessing, and built again. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some households intentionally mixed animal dung into the floor mixture because the fibers made it bind better and resist cracking when dry. It sounds horrific, but the result was smoother, tougher, even slightly waterproof. Travelers once wrote that a well-packed dung floor could shine like leather after years of use. You look closer, hoping this one isn't among the polished kind. The children enter, laughing, dragging small bundles of straw. They scatter them across the center of the room like confetti. The straw softens the step, muffles the cold, and for a brief moment the place looks festive. Golden ribbons over a brown stage. The mother tosses a pinch of dried herbs, sweet gale, maybe mint, onto the floor, muttering that it keeps spirits away. The smell blooms gently, almost clean. You realize this constant layering, straw, herbs, ash, was its own slow conversation between humans and dirt. Each season they buried the old rushes and laid new ones, a rhythm as predictable as planting crops. Scholars still debate whether this ritual maintenance had symbolic meaning. Some say it was purely practical, others argue it represented a renewal rite, a quiet acknowledgement of time passing underfoot. You prefer that second version. It fits the sleepy poetry of the place. The old man returns from outside carrying a bucket of half-melted snow, which he splashes along the edge of the wall before tamping it down with his boot. You wince, but he nods confidently. "Keeps the dust down," he says. "It also keeps the smell up, though you don't mention that." Soon the fire's warmth turns the damp soil into a slow-rising mist, and you watch the vapor curl like breath from a dragon's mouth. In that moment, the floor really does seem alive, breathing, exhaling warmth from below. Maybe that's where the myth began. The illusion of heat born from moisture and imagination. A hen clucks near your foot, scratching at the ground for stray crumbs. She finds a worm and gulps it greedily. You can't help thinking how strange it is that every layer of this house, the walls, the floor, even the animals, serves double duty. The walls hold heat and soot. The animals give warmth and eggs. The floor keeps you grounded and stores yesterday's fire in its dreams. It's a kind of ecosystem of endurance. You test the ground again, pressing your heel firmly. Beneath the top crust, the soil feels cool but not freezing. Maybe there's a kernel of truth here after all. Heat radiates downward at night and rises by morning, so perhaps the villagers sensed something real beneath their folklore. You glance toward the door, where the child has drawn a circle in ash, muttering about earth spirits. She says they keep the warmth from leaving. It's adorable, but it also echoes a scholarly debate still running today. Did medieval people actually personify the elements, fire, air, earth, as cooperative spirits? Or did they simply use myth to explain the small successes of practical life? One camp calls it animistic residue, from pre-Christian belief. The other insists it was just metaphor for cause and effect. Either way, it worked. People obeyed the ritual, repeated it each winter, and somehow survived. The smoke above you thickens. The fire crackles, sending its warmth crawling along the floorboard's absent edges. The old woman pokes the coals and hums a tune about St. Kenelm guarding homes from frost. You can feel the rhythm of her voice in the ground itself, a pulse moving through the packed soil. The longer you listen, the more you believe the myth. The earth does seem to hold something. Memory, heat, stubborn life. Maybe not enough to stop the cold entirely, but enough to convince tired people that nature hadn't abandoned them. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine this same floor centuries ago, freshly packed, young hands pressing it flat, someone laughing about the warmth to come. Generations later, their laughter is still trapped in the soil, mixed with ash and footprints. That's the real insulation, memory layered thicker than clay. You open your eyes, smile through the haze, and whisper to yourself that perhaps the ground really is warm, not with heat, but with the persistence of everyone who ever tried to believe it was. Night settles in like a heavy quilt, and the villagers begin climbing their way up to the narrow loft tucked beneath the rafters, a space so cramped and low you can touch the roof with your fingertips, but somehow it's the warmest part of the house. You follow the wooden ladder creaking beneath your feet, smoke rising to greet you halfway. Up here, the air feels thicker, heavier, and yet the chill is gone. You're literally sleeping in the exhaust pipe of the entire house, the human version of an attic squirrel. And, strangely enough, that's the point. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Before proper chimneys became common in the 14th and 15th centuries, families in much of rural Europe built open hearth houses with sleeping lofts precisely because smoke naturally rose and got trapped beneath the thatch. Down below, it choked the fire pit. Up here, it lingered just long enough to keep the chill away. The air might taste like ash, but the temperature is survivable. To them, that counted as progress. You lie down on the straw mattress, a patchwork of old rags, sheepskins, and flattened bundles of hay, and immediately feel the warmth seeping up from the layers of soot-saturated roof above. It's like sleeping inside a bread oven that forgot to preheat properly. The boards creak as the rest of the family settles in. Parents, children, even the grandmother who coughs but never complains. The animals below stir restlessly, their body heat rising through the floorboards, adding another layer of invisible insulation. The smell is complex: burnt wood, wool, sweat, and smoke mixed into something oddly nostalgic, as if the air itself remembers everyone who ever slept here before. A quirky tidbit whispers through the haze of half-dream. Medieval travelers often reported that these lofts were so smoky that families woke up with blackened faces and hair stiff from soot. Some said villagers used lard or animal fat on their faces before sleeping to keep ash from sticking to their skin, an early questionable version of night cream. You can imagine waking up glistening like a roast pig and thinking, "Ah yes, beauty sleep achieved." And yet, despite the discomfort, this setup worked remarkably well. It trapped enough heat to keep people alive through sub-zero nights, and the smoke, unpleasant as it was, served a strange secondary purpose. It kept pests at bay. Fleas, lice, and even rats disliked the upper haze, making the loft the least infested spot in the house. You cough again, but decide that's a fair trade. Scholars still debate how intentional this design really was. Some argue that lofts evolved from storage spaces that people started sleeping in out of desperation. Others believe it was an early understanding of convection, primitive physics discovered through daily wheezing. You prefer the romantic version, humans learning to adapt by listening to the elements, sensing warmth rising like invisible grace and following it upward toward survival. You shift, the straw rustling beneath you, and watch the smoke undulate above like lazy clouds painted on a ceiling. Through a small crack in the roof, the moonlight filters in, silver and soft, catching the drifting ash and turning it into a galaxy. It's almost beautiful, this chaos of necessity. Below you, the fire hisses, and someone murmurs a prayer in the dark. The words are slurred but rhythmic, an invocation to keep the coals alive till dawn. You listen, half awake, feeling the rhythm pulse through the boards. In the stillness, the entire house seems to breathe. The low rumble of the animals, the creak of wood adjusting to temperature, the faint crackle of fire shifting in its sleep. You think about how modern people chase silence for comfort, while here, life's noise is the lullaby. Your skin itches a bit from the straw, but the warmth is undeniable. You're wrapped in blankets of rough wool, heavier than they look, woven with lanolin and labor. The mother reaches up to tuck her youngest child closer, pressing their tiny face into the hollow of her shoulder to share breath. This, you realize, is what medieval coziness meant. No scented candles, no fleece throws, just proximity, persistence, and a stubborn refusal to freeze. There's humor in it, too. The father sneezes, sending a puff of soot into the air, and someone below mutters, "Bless you and bless the hole in the roof." You smile into your blanket. Medieval comedy still holds up. The more you lie there, the more you understand how people grew attached to this smoky intimacy. Each night was a shared experiment in endurance. Each dawn that didn't freeze their toes was proof that their rough design, fire pit, roof vent, loft worked just enough. And while historians can debate the sophistication of medieval architecture, no one can deny the genius of desperation. Humans learn to turn even smoke into shelter. As your eyes grow heavy, the last sounds you hear are the faint whisper of the wind through the thatch and the comforting chorus of breathing around you. The house feels like a living thing. Bones of timber, lungs of fire, heart of coals. You exhale slowly, and for a fleeting second the air feels warm against your lips, as if the smoke itself were tucking you in. Then everything fades into the slow rhythm of the fire, the sigh of the night, and the quiet pride of people who learn to sleep inside their own invention of survival. Morning breaks not with sunlight but with argument. The first voice rises from the hearth, sharp and certain, declaring that the log pile has been unfairly used overnight. Another responds from the corner, muffled under a wool blanket, accusing the first of hogging the warm side of the fire. Welcome to the delicate democracy of medieval heating, where every inch of warmth is a political boundary, and every ember a resource to be negotiated with passion. The smoke still drifts lazily through the rafters, half of it escaping through the roof vent, the rest choosing to hang around to watch the drama. Down here, the concept of personal space doesn't exist. Bodies are geography, and warmth is currency. Whoever sits closest to the hearth holds power. not the kind backed by crowns or swords, but the kind that determines whether your toes remain attached till spring. The old man with the poker, unofficially known as the fire warden, makes the first ruling of the day. He taps the glowing coals with solemn precision and declares the fire alive enough to cook porridge but too young to waste on idle warming. The others grumble but obey. A mainstream historical fact lingers behind this smoke-filled diplomacy. In most medieval cottages, the hearth wasn't just a physical center but a social one. It governed behavior, dictated schedules, and enforced an unspoken hierarchy. The person controlling the fire, usually the elder, sometimes the woman of the house, was not to be challenged lightly. Firekeeping was both an art and a privilege. Mismanaging it could mean freezing, starvation, or worse, burning down everything you owned. The hearth was both parliament and altar, and the flames flickered like a temperamental deity whose favor had to be earned daily. You watch as breakfast negotiations unfold with the precision of ritual. The children are sent outside to fetch kindling, frozen sticks from the riverbank, brittle and reluctant to burn. The youngest slips, landing in the snow, but laughs through the cold. They return triumphant, arms full of damp wood. The mother scolds them for bringing wet fuel, and the father mutters that it will dry faster if they wave it near the fire. He's immediately told to sit back down because last time he dried wood, it ended with a scorched bench. Every house in the village has similar stories. Accidents are communal jokes, and jokes are a form of warmth. A quirky tidbit preserved in some village records describes how neighbors would gossip about who had lazy fires, a term meaning both literal weakness of flame and metaphorical laziness of spirit. A lively fire implied moral vigor, industriousness, even divine favor. To let it die out, especially before dawn, was almost scandalous. As the fire grows stronger, its circle of influence expands. People shuffle stools closer, inch by inch, pretending not to notice the movement. It's an unspoken game, a social ballet of proximity and pride. The eldest woman, wrapped in a shawl of coarse wool, stakes her claim at the prime spot. She sits like a queen at court, her face half lit, half shadowed, eyes glinting with victory. The men linger on the outskirts, feigning indifference but carefully angling their boots toward the glow. The children hover between them, ready to dart forward at any moment of distraction. You can feel the invisible heat politics at play, the geometry of survival, dictated by firelight. Scholars who study peasant life still debate whether these dynamics reflected gender hierarchies or simply practical survival. Some claim the hearth reinforced patriarchal order. Others argue it empowered the matron as the keeper of domestic fire. The truth, as always, lies in the flicker between both. Outside, frost glazes the fields like glass, and a thin sun struggles over the horizon. Inside, the walls radiate faint warmth, more imagined than real, but enough to keep spirits from cracking. The old man finally concedes and tosses a dry branch into the fire. Sparks rise, tiny meteors ascending into the smoke. Everyone exhales in satisfaction, the morning tension softening into comfort. For a moment, the room feels unified, the petty politics dissolved into the universal language of warmth. You can see why. For all their struggles, these people never abandoned communal life. Solitude would have meant coldness, and coldness in their world was death. Better to share the fire and endure the noise than freeze in silence. The youngest child giggles as a spark lands on his sleeve, quickly patted out by his mother. The laughter spreads easily, bouncing off soot-black walls, echoing through the low roof like the sound of survival itself. The rhythm of daily life resumes. A pot is set over the fire, filled with barley and water. The dog circles twice before curling into a ball by the ashes. The old man hums tunelessly, a melody as ancient as the smoke that threads through his beard. The hearth is once again the center of everything. Argument, sustenance, companionship, ritual. Even the smoke seems friendlier now, swirling in golden ribbons under the morning light filtering through the roof. You notice something remarkable about this balance. Every act around the hearth has a logic of generosity disguised as selfishness. People inch closer to the flame not only to warm themselves but to keep the circle tight, trapping heat within bodies. The proximity of skin, the press of shoulders, the soft murmur of conversation, all these things make warmth multiply. It's physics and affection combined, medieval thermodynamics written in laughter. You can almost measure temperature in smiles per minute. By midday, the politics of the morning have evolved into the diplomacy of maintenance. The women tend the stew, keeping the pot's bottom from burning, while the men step outside to chop fresh logs. Children fetch snow for melting, their red cheeks glowing like small lanterns. Inside, the air smells of wood, salt, and slow simmering grain. The old woman dozes, the fire reflecting in her closed eyelids like a heartbeat. There's peace here, hard-earned and fragile. A latecomer enters. A neighbor wrapped in frost, shaking snow from his cloak. Without a word, space is made for him by the fire. No one complains, though it means a tighter circle. The warmth must stretch again, thinner now, but somehow deeper. This gesture, wordless, instinctive, reveals more about community than any sermon. In this room, generosity is not moral virtue, it's survival strategy. A shared flame burns longer. By evening, the village smells of 10 similar fires, each one pulsing through walls and thatch, each one shaping its own tiny politics of proximity. Smoke threads rise into the twilight sky, merging into a single gray cloud that hovers protectively over the roofs. You step outside for a moment and see it glowing faintly in the last light, a communal breath of survival drifting toward the stars. Back inside, the villagers laugh over supper, and the old man tells the same story he tells every winter about the year the fire almost died, and a stranger helped rekindle it. The children listen wide-eyed, not because they haven't heard it before, but because stories like flames need to be fed constantly to stay alive. When the meal ends, the family settles again around the hearth, faces glowing amber in the dim light. The arguments of morning are forgotten. The politics of heat have dissolved into a kind of peace born only from exhaustion and satisfaction. The fire burns steady, crackling softly, and its light plays across soot-stained beams like a promise. The day has been survived, the night will be endured, and the warmth, though uneven, smoky, and fickle, is enough. The hearth once more reigns unchallenged, its embers whispering authority in a language older than kings. The night has deepened again, heavy and patient, and the cottage is quiet except for the low, steady sound of breathing, the soft rhythm of life folded around the hearth. You sit close to the fire and watch its glow sink lower, the bright tongues of flame shrinking into coals. This is the most delicate hour in a medieval household, the hour when the fire must be tamed, not fed, so that it survives the darkness without devouring the home. The art of the ashbed begins here. The old woman crouches, her face orange in the last flickers, and carefully spreads a layer of gray ash over the glowing embers. It looks simple, but every motion is measured, as though she were tucking in a sleeping child. Beneath the surface, the coals still breathe, a slow, invisible pulse that will smolder till dawn. The villagers call this banking the fire, a phrase that means both protection and trust. If she does it well, the morning will begin with a whisper of heat still alive under the ash, ready to awaken. If she fails, everyone wakes to cold and shame. There's a mainstream historical fact buried beneath this domestic ritual. Long before chimneys and iron grates, peasants across Europe relied on these ash beds to maintain their fires overnight. Without matches or flint readily at hand, rekindling a dead fire was exhausting, even perilous on freezing mornings. A few preserved household manuals from the late Middle Ages describe this method almost reverently. Cover the heart of the flame with soft ash, one says, lest it perish while you dream. In some regions of France it was called couvrir la braise, to cover the ember. The technique wasn't just practical, it was a moral act. A household that kept its hearth alive was considered blessed, orderly, vigilant. A dead hearth signaled negligence, or worse, bad luck. The old woman finishes her task, taps her fingers against her apron to shake off the soot, and murmurs a small phrase under her breath. It sounds like a prayer, though it might just be habit. Then she scatters a handful of coarse salt across the ashes, a curious touch that catches your attention. That, too, has history. A quirky tidbit whispered across centuries says that some villagers believed salt would feed the spirits of the flame, ensuring it found its way back in the morning. Others thought salt frightened evil from the coals, keeping witches or wandering souls from stealing the household's fire. Whether superstition or proto-science, it became tradition, a sprinkle of protection on the sleeping embers. You can almost feel the care that went into this gesture, this mix of fear and faith that ruled ordinary survival. The air is cooling now, and you can see your breath near the floor. But the heat from the buried coals still radiates in waves, faint but steady. You rest your palm above the mound of ash, and feel that soft hum, an ancient technology that never asked for praise. Every peasant knew 1,000 tricks like this, small acts of patience that turned hardship into art. You imagine countless hands over the centuries repeating this same motion, covering the last glow of night, whispering good night to the fire as though it were a living member of the family. The rest of the cottage sleeps. The children curl together on straw pallets wrapped in heavy wool, and the father snores faintly by the door, axe within reach in case of wandering dogs or worse. The mother lies nearest the hearth, one arm draped protectively toward the warmth. You look around and realize how perfectly everything is arranged, not by wealth but by need. Those closest to the fire are the guardians, those farther away depend on them. Even in rest, the architecture of survival holds. A thin shaft of moonlight slips through the roof hole, turning the floating ash motes into silver dust. You think about how much human ingenuity hides inside this smoky simplicity. These people didn't have thermometers or insulation, but they understood balance. Too much fire and the roof catches too little and frost creeps in like a thief. The ash bed is that balance, the narrow line between comfort and disaster. Scholars still debate how effective it truly was. Some say it maintained usable embers for nearly 12 hours. Others claim it was mostly symbolic, a psychological balm against fear of the dark. Both may be true. The mind, after all, needs warmth as badly as the body. Toward midnight, the old woman stirs again. She sits up, senses something in the air, and pokes a finger through the ash mound. A small orange glow answers her. She smiles, satisfied, then lies back down without a word. You realize she doesn't even need to see the fire anymore. She feels it through instinct, the way a sailor feels wind through the hull of a ship. That connection, that awareness of warmth as a living thing, runs deeper than science. It's intimacy with an element. Hours pass. Outside, wolves call faintly from the forest, their cries swallowed by distance. Inside, the air thickens with stillness, and you find yourself listening to the soft crack of shifting coals beneath the ash. Each tiny pop feels like a heartbeat, reassuring and eternal. This sound, repeated across centuries and continents, is the lullaby of civilization itself, the sound of humans mastering the smallest piece of chaos just enough to sleep beside it. By early dawn, frost flowers bloom along the inside of the window, their crystalline veins catching the first blue light. The family begins to stir. The mother rises first, wraps her shawl tight, and kneels before the hearth. With a wooden spoon, she brushes the ash aside in gentle circles, revealing faint red beneath. She exhales softly, blows once, and a thread of smoke curls upward. Then she leans close, cups her hands and breathes again. Slow, coaxing breaths as if encouraging a child to wake. The ember brightens, pulses, and suddenly a tiny flame licks the wood. She grins, triumphant. Another day won. There's no cheering, no applause, only quiet satisfaction. The others pretend to still be asleep, but you know they're watching. Everyone in this world knows that the first flame of morning is sacred. It means you made it. The mother feeds the newborn fire with twigs, whispering rhythmically to keep her breath steady. The sound is part prayer, part technique. Soon the fire catches, the hearth glows, and the cycle begins anew. The same flame reborn through care, patience, and the stubborn refusal to surrender to cold. You look at her hands, cracked, blackened, trembling slightly from age, and think how many thousands of mornings they've repeated this ritual. Those hands have held tools, bread, and children, but none so carefully as the ember. The fire is her partner, her proof of continuity, her legacy. When she dies, the family will remember how she could summon warmth from ashes. They'll do the same, passing the knowledge like a story. Outside, the first rooster crows, muffled by frost. Smoke begins to leak from the hole in the roof again, curling into the pale sky. The smell of heat fills the air before the heat itself does, rich and comforting. The children stretch, the father stirs, the grandmother coughs once, a sound more ritual than illness. The day has begun, and though the floor is cold, and the wind hums through the walls, the hearth stands proud, alive because someone loved it enough to protect it through the night. That's the strange grace of the ash bed. It turns survival into faith. No one here calls it science, but it is. Thermal management, oxygen control, chemical persistence, yet it's also something more tender, an act of trust that the world will still burn for you come morning. When you finally rise and step outside, the smoke from a dozen cottages twirls into the sky like a village-wide exhale. Each thread of gray is a victory flag, a declaration that the people below have endured another night, and the wind, gentle and cold, carries their triumph over the fields, whispering it across the frozen earth. Soft, invisible proof that life against every odd refuses to go out. By midday, the air in the cottage grows so thick you could almost chew it. The fire, overfed with damp wood and animal dung, sends up a slow, sulking column of smoke that turns the ceiling into a rolling storm cloud. You wipe your eyes and realize that breathing feels like inhaling soup. The old man calls this good heat. He grins through the haze, his beard glistening with moisture, and declares that today's smoke will drive the frost out of the bones. He isn't wrong. Your skin prickles, your clothes cling, and beads of sweat gather under your collar. You're sitting in what amounts to a medieval sauna, though no one here knows the word. All they know is that after enough hours inside a sealed hut, every pore of your body sings with warmth, and for the first time since autumn, the cold feels far away. Outside, winter still gnaws at the earth. The snow lies in stubborn ridges against the door. The sky the color of pewter. The air so sharp it could slice an apple. Inside, the contrast is absurd. Steam drifts from hair and shoulders, breath mingling with smoke, the temperature climbing high enough to fog the animal bladder windows. The villagers think it's divine balance. The world freezes, the house sweats, and a mainstream historical fact surfaces. In parts of Scandinavia, the Baltics, and northern Russia, scholars have documented that early wooden houses without chimneys frequently doubled as sweat rooms during midwinter. People would deliberately seal the vents for a few hours, letting the fire fill the space with heat and vapor. They believed it purified the air, drove illness out through the skin, and hardened the body for the months ahead. In some regions, this habit became so common that bathhouses evolved from it. The first proto-saunas born accidentally from poor ventilation and clever endurance. The scene before you feels almost ritualistic. The family sits close together, stripped down to thin linen shifts, glistening in the dim orange light. The fire crackles, coughing every few seconds like an old man clearing his throat. Steam rises from the stew pot and merges with the smoky air until the whole room blurs. The youngest child laughs, tracing patterns in the window condensation. The grandmother chuckles, calling him a frost spirit trying to melt. Sweat runs down your spine, soaking into the coarse wool underlayer that now feels like a wet rug. You're uncomfortable but strangely grateful. The ache of cold has been replaced by something primal and alive. The body is remembering what it means to be warm. You think of another quirky tidbit, one that fits perfectly with the moment. In some medieval villages, people truly believed sweat was the physical form of sin, leaving the body. The more you sweated, the purer you became. Priests in colder regions actually encouraged smoke cleansing, claiming it mimicked the fires of purgatory, an earthy rehearsal for salvation. You glance around and realize that, theological or not, everyone looks serene. The old man hums softly, eyes half closed. The woman stirs the pot lazily, her movements unhurried. Even the dog, tongue lolling, seems to bask in this makeshift sanctum of heat. The air is oppressive now, each breath like drinking from a steaming bowl. Sweat drips into your mouth, tastes faintly of salt and ash. You can almost see heat shimmering between faces, bending the air like a mirage. The walls, blackened and glistening, release years of stored smoke that mingle with today's new layer, building a patina of human endurance. No one complains. They endure, because enduring is easier than admitting exhaustion. The mother adds a handful of dried herbs, thyme and yarrow, into the pot, claiming it helps soften the air. A sweet, grassy scent cuts through the heaviness, and suddenly the smoke feels less hostile, almost kind. The scholar in your mind notes another debate. Historians still argue whether these accidental saunas actually improved health. Some claim they boosted circulation and warded off frostbite. Others believe the smoky humidity spread disease faster, fostering lung ailments and eye infections. The truth, as with so many medieval contradictions, sits somewhere in the middle. The body suffered, but the spirit flourished. In a world of endless cold and hunger, sweating was proof of life. You begin to drift into that half-dreaming state brought on by warmth and monotony. The fire hums, the air trembles, and you can almost imagine the centuries melting away. The same scene playing out across endless winters in countless cottages across the coldest corners of Europe. Each generation discovered this strange magic on its own. If you can't escape the smoke, embrace it. If you can't breathe clean air, breathe holy heat. Its survival rewritten as ceremony. After a while, the mother opens the door just a crack. A shock of cold air slashes into the room like a blade. Steam billows out, and everyone inhales sharply. The breath of winter meeting the breath of the house. The air cools slightly, circulation restored. The dog stretches, shakes, and trots to the doorway, pressing its nose into the snow. The contrast is intoxicating. The rush of cold against heat, the gasp of lungs suddenly awake. You can see why people kept doing this, year after year. It wasn't just about warmth. It was about remembering that warmth meant something. It was a defiance against the season itself, a proclamation that the human body, fragile and smoke-soaked, could still outwit the elements. The door closes again, and the air settles. The family resumes their slow rhythm, the room returning to its orange glow. The steam has thinned now, but a pleasant dampness lingers, clinging to skin and hair. You realize that everyone is glowing, not just from heat but from something like pride. They've transformed discomfort into power, chaos into comfort. The line between survival and ritual has blurred completely. By evening, when the temperature drops again, the house still radiates warmth from within. The walls sweat, the floor steams faintly, and even the roof beams hold the memory of heat. The villagers lie down to sleep, wrapped in damp blankets, smiling as if they've been baptized by their own endurance. The fire, no longer roaring, sighs beneath its ash bed, a subdued heart that will keep the embers of this strange sacred sauna alive till dawn. Outside, frost creeps silently across the fields, reclaiming the world inch by inch. But inside this small, smoky miracle of a cottage, the air hums with leftover life. Every breath carries the proof that warmth, no matter how improvised, no matter how fleeting, can still conquer the cold. By dawn, the heat from the previous night's accidental sauna has thinned into a lazy haze that clings stubbornly to the rafters. The air no longer burns your lungs, it just lingers, damp and sooty, like the ghost of warmth past. You look toward the small opening in the wall where a faint gray light filters through something that should be glass but isn't. It looks like cloudy parchment stretched over a frame, and in a sense that's exactly what it is. The villagers call it a window, but the term feels generous. What you're staring at is animal bladder, scraped thin, dried and oiled until translucent, a material halfway between leather and light. You move closer, curious. The surface quivers in the breeze like skin trying to remember it was once alive. When the sun strikes it, faint veins and fibers glow through the surface, giving the impression that the house itself is breathing light through its flesh. The children are already awake, faces shining from the night's sweat, and they giggle as they press their palms to the quivering window. The faint warmth of their hands leaves temporary prints, ghostly smudges that fade in seconds. The father calls out, half amused, half irritated, warning them not to damage the bladder because replacing it means killing another pig, and winter pigs are precious. That's the reality here. Nothing in this world is built without consequence. Every object costs a life, a season, or a sin. You glance again at the window and think about how these villagers invented transparency without glass, primitive innovation born not of ambition but necessity. A mainstream historical fact takes shape in your mind. Before glassmaking became affordable in Europe around the 14th century, peasants relied on stretched animal membranes, oiled cloth or thinly scraped horn to cover window openings. These let in light but kept out wind, sort of. The truth was more complicated. They trapped some warmth but also trapped moisture, turning cottages into humid ovens by day and icy boxes by night. Condensation would gather and freeze on the inner surface, creating ghostly frost flowers that the children traced like drawings on winter mornings. When the fires burned high, the membrane softened, sagged, and sometimes tore, letting drafts creep in again. It was a constant struggle between ingenuity and futility. You step closer to the window, and a cold droplet slides down from the upper corner. You touch it. It's not water, but resin from the oil used to seal the pores. The villagers swear by fish oil for the best result, though the smell, sharp and sour, lingers for weeks. You take a slow breath and understand why every medieval home smelled faintly of the sea, even miles from the coast. In some areas, people preferred linseed oil, but that required trade, and trade required coin. So for most, the house smelled like smoked pork, soot, and rotten cod. Somehow, it all added up to comfort. The old woman at the hearth notices your interest. Without speaking, she takes a small knife from the wall and scrapes a thin line along the edge of the bladder window, where frost has thickened overnight. The frozen layer peels away like translucent lace falling in curls onto the sill. She nods approvingly. It's her morning ritual, like tending a house's eyelids. The scraping keeps the light coming through, keeps the illusion of day alive inside the gloom. In these cottages, light is a kind of heat for the soul. Without it, despair seeps in faster than cold. The rest of the family begins their daily work. The mother mends a torn sleeve near the fire. The father sharpens a blade, his movements rhythmic. Every so often one of them glances toward the window, as though expecting it to fail. They know from experience that too much sun or too much frost will tear the thin film, And when that happens, the repair is crude, a patch of new bladder sewn or nailed over the gap, or if none is available, a piece of greased cloth. The result is always uneven, light fractured into amber and gray like a broken mosaic. You can imagine how it must look from outside, a patchwork of translucent scars, glowing faintly in the darkness, turning each cottage into a wounded lantern. There's a strange beauty in this fragility. You crouch near the wall and feel the draft slipping through microscopic gaps. It brushes your cheek with the cold breath of the world outside. You can smell the snow, the smoke, the faint sweetness of wood ash. For all their efforts, the villagers can never truly separate inside from outside. The elements are always negotiating through tiny openings, fire sneaking out as heat, frost creeping in as whisper. It's a constant dialogue between safety and surrender. You remember a quirky tidbit from a monk's journal written in the 1200s. He described visiting a peasant house so well sealed that light entered as if through the skin of a saint, pale and miraculous. The phrasing was meant as mockery, yet you find it oddly poetic. These houses really did glow from within. Dim, golden, intimate. In the evenings when fires burned strong, the windows shone like candlelit parchment lanterns. From the road, travelers could spot them from afar, little beacons of life in a frozen world. There's something timeless about that image, the poorest homes giving off the warmest light. The day outside remains gray, but the faint shimmer through the window shifts with the hours. The material changes color like mood, gold at sunrise, pewter at noon, rose at sunset. The old woman claims she can tell time by the tone of light filtering through it. When it turns bone white, she says, it's nearly night, and the fire must be fed again. You watch as she tests her theory, nodding toward the fading glow. She's right. The shadows grow longer, colder. By late afternoon, the cold outside deepens, and the membranes stiffen again. A thin crack forms at one corner with a soft, papery sigh. The father curses under his breath but doesn't move to fix it yet. It's too cold to work bare-handed. Instead, he stuffs a wad of sheep's wool into the gap, a temporary solution that will buy a few days at most. You realize how much of medieval life was spent negotiating with impermanence. Nothing was sealed forever. Everything leaked, creaked, or decayed. Yet somehow, it all held together long enough for another dawn. The smoke thickens as the night meal begins to simmer. Reflected light from the fire makes the window glow again, its golden sheen now pulsing in rhythm with the flames. You can almost imagine the entire cottage as a single living organism, the fire as heart, the smoke as breath, the window as the translucent skin between inside and out. The people inside are its thoughts, flickering in and out of focus, suspended between survival and sleep. You shift back toward the fire and glance once more at the trembling sheet of light. It's fragile, imperfect, and utterly human. When the wind moans outside and snow begins to hiss against the wall, the window quivers but holds. The children watch the patterns of frost form again along the edges, tracing the shapes like constellations of ice. The mother hums softly, stirring the pot. The old man adds one more log to the fire. The cycle continues, the warmth of life pressing against the cold of the world, separated only by the thinnest veil of oiled skin. As the night deepens, you begin to see how much beauty existed in this flawed engineering. It wasn't meant to be perfect, it was meant to be enough. The medieval window never promised insulation or clarity. It promised only a sliver of light when the world outside went black, and sometimes that was all the difference between despair and hope. The fire dims, the smoke thickens, and the window glows one last time before fading into shadow. You can't tell whether the light comes from the flames or from the memory of daylight still trapped in the oiled skin. Either way, it feels alive, and as you lie down once more beneath the low beams, eyes half closed, that trembling golden light becomes the last thing you see, the quiet heartbeat of a world that never truly conquered darkness but learned with stubborn grace to let it shimmer through. The night howls outside like a choir of restless animals. The wind doesn't merely blow, it claws, scrapes, insinuates itself into every crevice, and presses its invisible fingers against the walls until the timbers groan like living ribs. Inside, the villagers huddle closer to the hearth, pretending not to hear it. Everyone in the room knows the sound of a draft when it finds a way in. It begins as a faint whistle under the door or through the gaps where the wattle meets the beam. Then it grows into a sly, cold thread of air that curls around ankles like a snake. The youngest child shrieks and insists a spirit has brushed his foot. The old woman smacks his shoulder with maternal affection and mutters that if it's a spirit, it's only one of the cold folk come to see whether the living still have fire. No one laughs. The fire pops once, like punctuation, and the story of the night begins again. Another encounter between human warmth and the invisible world pressing to get in. You shift, trying to feel where the air seeps through. It's like hunting a ghost. The villagers are experts in this art. The mother crouches by the door, laying her hand along the edge until she feels the faintest kiss of frost. Here, she says softly, as if addressing the draft itself. She grabs a bundle of dried herbs from the rafters, rosemary, sage, and something else that smells faintly of iron. She twists them together into a loose knot and wedges it between the hinges. The fragrance blooms immediately, sharp and clean, cutting through the smoke. This isn't just a smell, it's a statement. In this world, herbs aren't only medicine, they're boundary markers. The villagers believe every doorway is an argument between safety and invitation. The right scent persuades the cold to stay out, or at least behave politely. A mainstream historical fact glows behind this practice. Throughout medieval Europe, drafts were associated not merely with temperature but with morality and metaphysics. The very word wind carried a double meaning, referring both to natural air currents and to unseen spirits or angels. Physicians warned that ill winds carried disease or melancholy. Theologians claimed that sudden chills might signify a demon's passage. Ordinary people didn't have the luxury of separating the physical from the supernatural. If cold crept through a wall, it meant the world beyond had found a weakness in your defense. So the door became a sacred object, the point where chaos pressed its face against the boundary of order. To live through winter meant constantly repairing that threshold, both with carpentry and prayer. The father joins his wife by the door, stuffing more straw into the gaps between planks. His fingers move with the weary confidence of repetition. He's done this every winter since childhood. He hums an old tune while working, something between a song and a charm. Each verse names a different kind of wind. The biting wolf wind from the north, the wet witch wind from the west, the whispering child wind from the graveyard. His voice is rough but steady. The children listen wide-eyed, half frightened, half comforted. The idea that every draft has a name gives it shape, and shape makes fear bearable. There's a small wooden crucifix nailed above the doorway, blackened by smoke but still visible. Around it, sprigs of dried rowan berries hang like tiny red beads. The old woman insists on changing them every solstice. She says rowan keeps the wind spirits from turning cruel. Scholars still debate where this belief began. Some say it's a pagan echo, a memory of older tree worship. Others claim it's simply good sense, since rowan has natural insect-repelling oils. Whatever the origin, it's one of countless small gestures that blur the line between science and superstition. You realize that in practice there was never a line to begin with. The air begins to change. The draft weakens, but not before leaving its mark. A patch of frost blooms along the bottom of the door, glittering like powdered glass. The mother kneels and traces a small circle in the frost with her finger, then wipes it away. She doesn't explain why. Maybe it's a way of claiming victory, a small symbolic act of control over the elements. Around her, The children mimic the motion on the floor, drawing circles of their own. The fire crackles amused. You can feel the warmth returning now, wrapping around your shoulders like a heavy cloak. The balance has shifted again, the human realm reasserting itself for another night. A quirky tidbit drifts through memory. Some medieval villagers believed that drafts weren't just nuisances but messages. If a door creaked open by itself or a chill brushed your neck in an empty room, it was said to be a sign of the dead visiting. Not necessarily malicious, sometimes just curious. People responded by muttering, "Stay warm, friend," into the air, a polite acknowledgement of invisible company. It's easy to scoff from a modern chair, but here, with smoke stinging your eyes and the wind whispering through unseen cracks, the habit feels natural. This house is a conversation with forces too large to see. The father straightens, satisfied with his repairs. The door, bound in its herbal wreath and woolen stuffing, holds firm. The sound of the wind outside shifts from shrill to muffled, like a beast sulking behind a wall. Inside, relief ripples quietly through the family. The grandmother spits into the fire, a final seal of luck, and everyone settles again in their usual places. The rhythm of life resumes. The creak of spoons in bowls, the soft drone of voices, the sigh of logs turning to embers. But the memory of the draft lingers like an aftertaste, a reminder that the house is never fully closed, only temporarily defended. You lean back and study the room, noticing how every object serves a double purpose: warmth and warding, comfort and charm. The bunches of herbs hanging from the rafters, the iron scissors tucked into the lintel, the worn wool rugs pressed against the corners, all of them are physical solutions layered with invisible meanings. Each item carries its own spell, spoken or not. The medieval mind was practical in ways modern people rarely appreciate. When survival depended on both wood and willpower, it made sense to treat both as equally sacred. Outside, the wind shifts direction, and the roof groans. A faint wail rises from the chimney, thin and eerie, as if something were calling down the flue. No one panics. This, too, has an explanation. The grandmother whispers that it's the chimney spirit asking for ash. She takes a pinch of soot between her fingers and tosses it into the flames. The sound fades immediately, swallowed by the roar of heat. You watch the fire flare and wonder whether she's feeding oxygen or faith. Probably both. The line between chemistry and prayer is a soft one in this world. A few moments later, the children fall asleep in a heap of wool and straw, faces flushed with warmth. The air has grown still again, the door silent, the frost subdued. Only the faintest breath of cold moves through the room now, gentle as a sigh. You close your eyes and listen to it mingle with the crackling fire, the steady pulse of human life beating back the chill. It's easy to see why people once personified these forces. The wind feels alive, curious, persistent. In a way, it is. It reminds you that even the strongest house is a temporary island in an ocean of weather and chance. As midnight deepens, you feel the warmth settle into your bones. The herbs by the door release one last wave of fragrance, mingling with smoke and sleep. The cold folk have been kept at bay, at least for tonight. Tomorrow, the wind will return with new arguments, and the villagers will meet it again with the same mixture of superstition, craftsmanship, and humor that has kept them alive for centuries. For now, the door holds, the draft sleeps, and the spirits, whatever they are, drift quietly away into the frost, leaving behind a silence so complete it hums. The house sighs once, as if relieved, and the embers glow steadily in the dark. You lie still, watching the orange light pulse through the gaps between shadows, and understand that every breath of warmth in this place is borrowed, negotiated, fragile, miraculous. The wind will come again, the frost will test the walls, and the door will creak open just enough to remind everyone that the world outside is still hungry. But tonight, The balance holds and the ancient covenant between fire and flesh remains intact. In this fragile peace, humanity endures, glowing softly behind its herbal defenses, whispering warmth into the endless cold dot. The snow hasn't stopped for days. It falls without hurry, soft and relentless, piling against every wall and fence until the world loses its edges. From a distance, the village looks like a handful of crumbs dropped onto a white tablecloth. Inside those crumbs, the people are fighting back, not with grand gestures but with hay. You walk outside and see it everywhere. Bundles of dry yellow grass stacked waist-high around the outer walls of cottages, pressed tight as though the houses were being tucked in under giant blankets. The sight is oddly comforting. Each home looks like a sleeping creature huddled inside its own nest. The villagers call this the hay wall, or the winter coat. It isn't elegant, but it works, or at least everyone swears it does. You step closer to one of these makeshift fortresses. The hay crackles under your fingers, stiff with frost near the surface but surprisingly dry within. You can smell summer in it, the ghost of sunlight, the memory of open fields before winter took over. It's a strange contrast, the world frozen and silent, and here you are, touching the warmth of a season long dead. That's exactly the point. In this world, warmth is memory made practical. The haystack isn't just insulation, it's nostalgia turned into architecture. A mainstream historical fact floats to mind. Across northern and central Europe, peasants routinely piled straw or hay against their cottages during winter. Archaeologists have even found soil stains marking where those piles once stood, the outlines of seasonal armor. The hay trapped air, reducing drafts through the walls and keeping livestock sheds warmer. It was renewable, cheap, and smelled faintly of hope. You walk around the back of the cottage, boots sinking into snow, and watch a farmer and his son at work adding more bundles. They move with the rhythm of habit, tossing the hay into place, then binding it with cords made of twisted bark. The boy coughs into his sleeve. The father pats his shoulder and says something about the hay chasing the cold away. The boy laughs, his breath a tiny cloud in the gray air. Their laughter echoes briefly, then fades into the muffled stillness that only deep snow can create. The sound reminds you of how quiet winter villages must have been. Every noise swallowed by frost, every voice a rare spark of life. And inside the cottage, you can feel the difference already. The walls, once icy to the touch, now radiate a faint warmth, as if the house itself were sighing in relief. The old woman nods approvingly. "The cows will thank us," she says, though there's not a cow in sight. She means the air, the fire, the bones of the building. Everything in this world is alive if it breathes heat. She reaches for a handful of hay from a basket near the door and stuffs it into the gaps around the window frame. The golden strands look absurd against the blackened wood, but the effect is immediate. The draft weakens. You remember a quirky tidbit. Some medieval households used to line the inside of their walls with straw mats, or even hang loose sheaves from ceiling beams, creating rooms that looked more like barns than homes. Travelers mocked them for living like beasts, but the beasts were the ones who stayed warm. Outside again, the men finish stacking and step back to admire their work. The cottage now looks bulkier, friendlier, as though it has grown fur. A chicken hops up onto the hay ledge, clucking contentedly. The farmer grins. "She'll lay better now," he says, and you realize he isn't joking. Chickens, too, benefited from the trapped warmth. Every creature shared in this collective invention, the whole village wrapped together in straw and willpower. Scholars later wrote that this was one of the earliest forms of passive insulation, a kind of seasonal architecture that blurred the line between shelter and landscape. You can see it in practice here, not as a theory, but as necessity turned into beauty. The smell of hay mixes with wood smoke, creating an aroma so earthy it feels edible. You breathe deeply and taste the faint sweetness of dried grass, the salt of your own breath. The snow muffles everything except that scent, and the steady sound of fire crackling from inside. The father wipes his hands, nods toward the field beyond the cottage, and says that in spring this hay will be broken down and turned to compost. Nothing is wasted. Even warmth has an afterlife here. You look across the village and see the same pattern repeating. Houses crouched under straw coats, their roofs heavy with snow, thin smoke rising like dreams escaping. Each home is both fortress and womb, a place built not to impress but to endure. As night comes, the effect becomes almost magical. The moonlight hits the hay and turns it pale silver. The snow around the walls glows faintly, and the entire village seems to float in a sea of light. You can imagine how this sight must have comforted travelers, a sign that somewhere within that glow people were still awake, still surviving. The old woman inside the house tells you that when she was young, her grandmother used to say that the hay wasn't just for warmth, it kept the winter spirits from clawing their way through the walls. They hate the smell of summer, she says, smiling at the memory. Whether it's superstition or poetry, the logic is perfect. You can almost hear the spirits scratching at the edges of the world, frustrated by this fragrant barrier of sunlight and memory. Scholars today might argue about whether the hay really made much difference. Some experiments suggest it only raised indoor temperatures by a few degrees. But here, a few degrees is everything. It's the difference between frostbite and fingers, between a fire that dies too fast and one that makes it till morning. And beyond the physics, there's psychology. Wrapping the house in hay is an act of defiance, a visible sign that humans refuse to surrender to the season. Its warmth you can see from the road, a declaration of care and stubborn faith. Later that evening, you sit by the hearth again. The air inside feels heavier now, thicker with the trapped heat that seeps slowly inward through the hay. You can hear faint crackling sounds from the walls, the dry stalks expanding and shifting as they adjust to temperature. The house almost purrs. The old man jokes that if the hay catches fire, at least will burn bright enough to warm the whole village. No one laughs loudly, but everyone smiles. Humor, too, is insulation here. It keeps the heart from freezing over. A dog curls near the door, sighing contentedly. The father leans back on his stool, watching the flames. "We're not rich," he says, "but the walls don't complain." He means the hay, of course. The walls can't speak, yet they creak less now, moan less when the wind pushes. The whole house feels calmer. You notice that even the drafts have changed tone. They whisper instead of wail, their edges dulled by layers of grass. It's like listening to winter through a blanket. Outside, the snow continues to fall. The hay walls glisten faintly under the moonlight, gathering frost like jewels. The wind prowls around the village, searching for an entrance, but finds none. For tonight, the humans have won. You lie down again by the fire, the smell of smoke and straw wrapping around you like another blanket, and realize how elegant survival can be when it's made of ordinary things. Grass, hands, patience, faith. When you close your eyes, you imagine spring returning. The hay pulled away, spread on fields, feeding new growth, the walls breathing freely again. Nothing wasted, nothing forgotten. The warmth that protected the living will nourish the earth, and the circle will begin anew. The villagers will gather fresh hay next harvest, laughing about how the last batch kept them alive through the cruelest nights. And when the next winter comes, and it always comes, they'll wrap their homes again. These humble monuments to endurance, shining gold against the snow. The fire murmurs its approval, throwing sparks that drift upward like tiny suns. You drift too, half asleep, the scent of summer still hanging in the cold night air. The hay walls settle around you with the faintest sigh, a sound so soft it might be gratitude. The earth thanking its children for remembering, even in the deepest freeze, how to build warmth out of the memory of sunlight. By dawn, the snow outside lies quiet, piled like folded linen across the roofs. The frost has thickened into delicate vines along the doorframe, yet inside the air hums with something alive, an invisible rhythm rising from the pot simmering over the hearth. The house smells of barley, onions, and wood smoke, a perfume of labor disguised as comfort. Everyone here wakes not to the sound of roosters but to the hiss of boiling. In winter, the fire that cooks is the same fire that saves, and the stew pot is as sacred as the cross above the lintel. You sit near the hearth and watch the old woman stirring with a wooden ladle polished by decades of use, her movements slow, hypnotic, endlessly patient. Steam rises around her like the ghost of summer's breath, and in that moment the line between meal and warmth disappears entirely. In the medieval cottage, cooking is never just cooking. It's heating, humidity control, ritual, and timekeeper. The moment the pot begins to murmur, the whole rhythm of the house shifts. A mainstream historical fact surfaces as if the steam carried it. In households across Europe from the 12th to the 16th centuries, the hearth was both kitchen and furnace, its constant fire serving every purpose from light to warmth to sterilization. Archaeological digs in England and Germany reveal hearthstones worn into shallow bowls, grooves formed by centuries of pots being dragged closer and farther, depending on whether the family sought heat for food or heat for fingers. The food wasn't simply sustenance, it was engineering. Every recipe doubled as a thermal strategy. Broth stayed on the flame all day because letting the fire die down risked freezing the house. The woman adds more water from a bucket, murmuring to herself in a voice that blends memory and prayer. The sound is tender, intimate, the incantation of a lifetime spent translating hunger into comfort. She gestures for you to taste the steam. It smells faintly of salt and ash. You lean in and realize how much heat that vapor carries. The air above the pot is warm enough to fog your eyelashes, and you think of all the centuries of cold faces leaning over cauldrons, absorbing the faint kindness of evaporation. A quirky tidbit bubbles up from your mind. In several northern villages, women used to hold their infants over the cooking pot on especially cold mornings, letting the steam moisten their cheeks before bundling them up for the day. They called it warming the bones. Primitive, perhaps, but beautifully logical. When the fire was too precious to waste, every breath of it had to be shared. Around the room, the family begins their morning rituals. The father shaves thin slices of hard cheese with a knife that looks older than his son. The children stack small logs near the hearth, careful not to step on the dogs sprawled in patches of warmth. The grandmother counts the embers with her eyes, as if divining fortune from their glow. The fire flickers and the shadows on the walls dance like living things. This isn't just survival, it's choreography, practiced and precise. Everyone knows exactly how much heat the stew can spare, when to stoke the coals, when to lift the lid. There is art in the restraint, an unspoken rule that waste is sin and care is salvation. By mid-morning, the smell has deepened, thickened, grown intimate. The pot no longer boils violently. It sighs. The old man dips a spoon, tastes, nods. The fire is steady, he says. Not the stew, the fire. Here, flavor is a thermometer. Taste a unit of measurement for heat. The children gather their bowls and sit cross-legged, eating in silence while the steam warms their faces. Each exhale joins the chorus of vapors filling the air until the cottage itself seems to breathe. This moisture will cling to the rafters, darken the beams, feed the soot that keeps the house insulated. Everything circles back. Even the act of eating contributes to the preservation of warmth. You think of the modern idea of multitasking and realize these people mastered it before it had a name. A thin draft curls through the window's edge, and instantly the mother moves a stool closer to block it, using her own body as insulation. Her back soaks in the heat from the hearth while her front faces the chill. Half warmth, half frost. You realize she is the real wall of this house, the sentient boundary between comfort and cold. Scholars have long debated whether the hearthwife, as she was sometimes called, held symbolic power in medieval households. Some see her as subservient, chained to domestic drudgery. Others argue she was priestess and engineer, keeper of flame and sustainer of life. Watching her now, it's impossible not to side with the latter. Every motion is command. She knows the fire's moods, the exact sound that means wood too wet or coals too few. The home bends to her quiet governance. The soup thickens through the day, drawing in every scent of wood, ash, and sweat. The family eats in shifts to conserve heat, one set of bodies warming the benches while another works. The walls themselves seem to inhale, storing the fire's breath for later. At midday the door opens, and a wave of icy air rushes in, followed by a neighbor carrying a basket of leeks. The cold cuts like a knife, silencing everything for a heartbeat. Then the old woman laughs, drops another log into the fire, and the warmth roars back, swallowing the chill. You can almost feel the relief ripple through the room, an invisible applause for the returning flame. The neighbor joins them without invitation, setting her hands over the pot and smiling as her fingers thaw. Heat is communal property here. To hoard it would be shameful. As afternoon fades, the stew evolves into a ritual centerpiece. People visit, trade stories, drop in bits of their own. A hunk of bread, a pinch of herbs, a scrap of salted meat. Each contribution changes both the flavor and the temperature, turning the meal into a living record of the day's generosity. In one corner, a small cat curls near the ashes, its fur shimmering with heat. The father mends a leather strap by the firelight, his knife flashing in rhythm with the sparks. The scene feels timeless, every motion tied to the pulse of the flames. A curious scientific truth hides inside this poetry. Anthropologists note that long simmering foods increased indoor humidity, which in turn kept respiratory systems from drying and reduced illness during the worst months. It's ironic that the smoke which blackened lungs was paired with the soup which soothed them. The medieval house was both poison and cure, alternating with the rhythm of the ladle. That paradox defines this entire existence. Nothing purely good, nothing purely bad, only balance. By evening, the air has turned amber with light. The stew is nearly gone. The pot, however, remains where it always does, over the same circle of heat that has never gone cold since autumn. The coals under it are banked with ash, still alive, still pulsing faintly red. The family eats the last spoonfuls slowly, reluctant to end the warmth. Outside, the snow continues to fall, silent, endless, indifferent. But inside this small world of stone, straw, and steam, the battle against the cold feels almost won. When night comes, the old woman performs her final ritual. She scrapes the last remnants of broth from the pot and spreads them thinly across the ashes to feed tomorrow's fire, she says. Fat, salt, and soot mingle into a thin crust that will spark easily at dawn. You marvel at the economy of it all. Every act connects to another, every bit of waste turned into potential. Even hunger leaves warmth behind. The house quiets. The pot swings slightly on its hook, whispering metallic sighs as it cools. The family drifts to their beds in the loft, still wrapped in the smell of food and smoke. Down below, the hearth glows like an animal's eye in the dark, patient and alive. You sit watching it until the last bubble of heat rises from the ash, thinking how many lives have been sustained by this simple partnership between hunger and flame. Cooking, in this world, isn't a chore. It's a negotiation with winter, a truce signed in steam. Before you finally lie down, you ladle a bit of water into the pot. The hiss that follows is soft but satisfying, like the house sighing in its sleep. Tomorrow morning, that hiss will return as a spark, a reminder that warmth never truly dies. It just changes form, waiting for the next pair of hands to coax it back to life. Outside, the snow deepens. Inside, the stew's scent lingers in the beams. The fire breathes slower, steadier, content. Somewhere between hunger and heat, the night exhales and the village dreams on, full, alive, and warm. By noon, water begins dripping in earnest through the roof seams. The family rushes to place pots and bowls beneath the leaks, laughing as the rhythmic plinks fill the house with a strange music. The house is crying again. One of the children says, "No," the grandmother corrects. "She's washing her face." The soot streaks on the walls begin to run, revealing veins of brown clay underneath. For the first time in months, light reflects off surfaces that aren't black. The mother stares at it, eyes wide. "I'd forgotten it was that color," she whispers. The fire sputters as drops fall into it, but the father quickly shields it with a flat stone. "Careful," he warns. "She might drown." He means the fire, though it's hard not to imagine he means the house. The grandmother hums her reassurance, a tune that might be older than the family itself. "No flame dies of honest rain," she says, and the words sound like both superstition and science. As the afternoon stretches on, the air changes. It's still cold, but it tastes different, less metallic, more alive. The children strip off their outer cloaks, running circles around the fire just for the pleasure of movement. The mother wipes the condensation from the window and gasps. "The snow's falling off the roof," she says. They all turn to look. Through the translucent skin of the window, they can see clumps of white sliding down, one after another, landing with soft, muffled thuds. Each sound feels like an answered prayer. The grandmother stands, leaning on her cane, and smiles with weary triumph. "The house is spitting out the winter," she says. The father nods slowly, his eyes glistening. She's lighter now. And indeed, the air feels different, less burdened, more open. The smoke from the hearth rises straighter, the ceiling haze thinning enough to glimpse the original texture of the rafters. As dusk approaches, the family gathers one last time around the hearth. The fire burns bright but small, content. The water on the walls has stopped dripping. The house exhales long and low, as if releasing its last held breath. The grandmother strokes the beam above her head. "You've done well," she whispers to the wood. "Rest now." The father echoes her quietly. The mother closes her eyes. The children lean against her shoulders. Outside, the wind softens into a lullaby. The snow glows blue beneath a hesitant moon. The world is still frozen, but the air carries the faintest hint of thaw, a whisper of mud, of grass remembering its color, of something beneath the ice stretching awake. The family doesn't move. They sit in that fragile silence, listening to the house settle around them, feeling its warmth pulse through the floor. And for the first time in months, no one speaks of the cold. They just breathe. The soot-stained walls glisten faintly in the firelight, and you realize that what they've built here isn't just shelter, it's endurance carved into architecture, a conversation between flame and flesh that refuses to end. When the grandmother finally drifts to sleep, her lips still curl in a smile. "Tomorrow," she whispers to no one, "she'll open her windows, and the fire, in its own language, answers with a single bright pop like a promise waiting to be kept." By the next morning, the first real sunbeam in months slides across the floorboards and touches the soot-dark wall like a blessing. It's faint, hesitant, but it's golden, the color no fire could ever quite imitate. The air is still cold, yet the light itself carries weight, like something that remembers warmth even before the body does. The grandmother wakes before anyone else, and sits up slowly, the creak of her joints matching the groan of the rafters above. She doesn't speak. She just watches the beam of sunlight crawl from one wall to another, breathing in its quiet promise. The mother stirs next, then the children. No one rushes. The fire is down to its last whisper, a red thread in a bed of gray ash, but the room feels different now, less desperate. The peat pile has dwindled to crumbs. The hay insulation has collapsed into muddy mounds against the walls, and the water bucket by the door holds only half-melted ice, yet the panic that once lived in every breath is gone. Survival no longer feels like battle, it feels like gratitude. The grandmother nods toward the fading hearth. "He's tired," she says, "but so are we." A mainstream historical fact warms that thought. When spring finally came to medieval villages after months of sealed living, people often let the last winter fire die on purpose. It was a ritual of respect and release, a kind of funeral for the season that had both tortured and protected them. Sometimes they carried a single coal from that fire to light the first cooking flame of spring, calling it the old heart that still remembers. What the villagers didn't know is that soot from those fires would remain for generations, carbon fossils of breath and time, clinging to the beams like black fingerprints of endurance. The father kneels by the hearth, stirring through the ashes with a wooden spoon until he finds one still glowing ember. He lifts it carefully, cupping his hand around its orange light. "Last of him," he says, "let's give him a good rest." The grandmother smiles faintly. "Not rest," she says, "sleep." He places the ember on a flat stone and lets it fade to gray. No one moves until the faint curl of smoke vanishes. For the first time in months, the air smells clean, sharp, empty. It feels almost too large to breathe. The children rush to the window. The snow outside has retreated into streaks of glassy white, revealing brown grass underneath, thin, flattened, but alive. Water drips from the eaves, steady and musical. The youngest laughs, pointing. "The sky is melting," he shouts. The mother laughs with him, pressing her hand to the oiled window skin. It's soft now, pliant, the frost gone. She pushes slightly, and a tiny tear opens near the corner, letting in a draft so fresh it almost stings. The whole room inhales. They open the door next. It groans, stiff from the months of being sealed, but when it finally yields, the light floods in like a second fire. The family steps outside, blinking against the brightness. Their breath still clouds, but it fades quicker now. The world smells strange. Earth, thaw, manure, smoke, life. Steam rises from the roof where the last snow slides free. The hay that had insulated the walls now lies in wet heaps, steaming faintly, already beginning to rot back into the soil. The father touches it and nods. "She's feeding the ground again," he says softly. "That's how it should be." The grandmother emerges last, leaning on her stick, her eyes watering not from smoke but sunlight. She squints at the sky. "So she came after all," she murmurs, "late but faithful." Her breath catches, her lips tremble as though she might cry, but instead she laughs, a dry, crackling sound like wood catching fire. Now she can rest. She means the house. Inside, the walls glisten with tiny droplets. The soot has softened, streaked by condensation, revealing patterns the family never saw before. Stripes of gold and black like the rings of a tree marking each year's survival. The grandmother runs her fingers over one of the beams. "Look," she says, "she's written her own story." Indeed, each layer of soot holds the memory of every winter, the years of thin harvests, of births and burials, of laughter echoing under low ceilings. You realize, watching her, that the house is not simply shelter but archive. Its walls are manuscripts of smoke, written in a language of ash and breath. The mother begins to clean, not to erase but to prepare. She scrapes away some soot from near the hearth and mixes it with water, making a thin gray paint. With a piece of cloth, she draws a rough cross above the door. "For luck," she says. The father adds another mark beside it, two wavy lines that mean river. "For thaw," he explains. The grandmother chuckles. "Between the two we'll manage." A quirky tidbit flickers in your memory. Medieval families often marked their ceilings and lintels at the end of winter with soot or chalk, part prayer, part record, part superstition. In some regions, they believed each mark bound the warmth of one year to the next, ensuring that the memory of heat never left the wood entirely. Whether they knew it or not, their ritual was poetic engineering, carbon sealing the surface against damp. By afternoon, the children are playing outside in the mud, their laughter echoing between melting drifts. The father has taken down the patched hay walls, stacking the soggy bundles to dry for compost. The mother opens the roof hole wider to let the last smoke escape. The air that enters is startlingly light, filled with the smell of thawed pine and wet soil. It feels like breathing the future. The grandmother sits by the doorway, her shawl slipping from her shoulders, and watches them with quiet pride. The house will dry, she says, and she'll forget her pain. Then, softer, but not all of it. That's how we remember who we were. As the sun lowers, the light floods the cottage through the thin, oiled window, casting golden ripples across the soot-streaked floor. The mother hums while sweeping, a melody brighter than her winter songs. The father sharpens his tools, preparing for field work. The children chase a bird that's returned too early. Every motion feels slow, ceremonial, as though they are relearning the choreography of living. The grandmother's eyes close. Her breathing slows. For a long moment, the only sounds are water dripping, wind whispering, and wood crackling softly in the cooling hearth. Then she speaks, her voice faint but clear. "We burned the world to stay alive," she says, "and now the world forgives us." No one answers. The family simply listens. The house creaks, releasing its final sigh of smoke, and the golden light fades into the calm gray of evening. The father stands and looks around the room one last time before nightfall. The soot no longer seems dirty. It's beautiful, a mural painted by survival. He smiles. "She'll be warm again next year," he says quietly. The mother nods. The children lean against each other, sleepy and content. As night deepens, the air cools, but no one lights the fire. The cold feels gentle now, a reminder rather than a threat. The moon glows faintly through the window skin, silvering every surface. The grandmother's breathing evens out. The walls glisten faintly, and the last drop of melted snow trickles down the beam like a final punctuation mark. The story of warmth, it seems, doesn't end when the fire dies. It lingers in soot and wood, in memory and breath, waiting for the next spark to wake it again. And as the night folds itself around the cottage, the narrator's voice softens to a whisper, slow, warm, fading with the rhythm of the house itself. Tomorrow they'll begin again. New fire, same walls, same sky. The warmth will rise as it always does from the stubborn hearts of those who refuse to forget the cold. End of script. Sweet dreams.